Hi, also today we'll be discussing Jane Eyre, an autobiography which was written by Charlotte Bronte. Before moving on to the novel, we'll take a look at Charlotte Bronte. So, Charlotte Bronte was an English 19th century writer whose novel Jane Eyre is considered a classic of Western literature. So, she was born on April 21st, 1816, in the village of Thornton in Yorkshire. So she is the eldest out of three famous Bronte sisters, that is Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, and Anne Bronte. She is the eldest out of these three famous Bronte sisters, and whose novels have become the standard of English literature. So she has been a writer all her life, and Bronte published her first novel, that is Jane Eyre, in 1847 under the manly pseudonym Currer Bell. She didn't use the name Charlotte Bronte in her earlier works. She used this pseudonym Currer Bell. Other major works of Charlotte Bronte are Shirley, a Tale, which was published in 1849, again under the pseudonym Currer Bell. Then Villette, which was published in 1853, and The Professor, a Tale, which was published in 1857. So I've cited a quote from Jane Eyre here, from which we get a very, basic idea what Jane Eyre is all about, how she is treated by other characters. So this is the dialogue. Do you think that because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, that I am soulless and hurtless? So from this very single dialogue, we get to know how she is treated by other characters in the novel. And now let's take a look at the social context of Victorian England or Bronte's England. Jane Eyre is set in the north of England sometime in the first half of the 19th century, and during this period British society was undergoing a very important or significant change, that is the transition from a rural economy to an industrial economy. So it was the time of industrial revolution and all that. So it was during this period Bronte wrote Jane Eyre. And Bronte touches on three areas of social concern of that time, that is education, women's employment, marriage. Also, the level of one's schooling was determined at that time, was by social class and also by gender. Women during those time were excluded from universities until 1870. At that point of time, young children in upper class and upper middle class families would often receive their earliest education from governesses. So governesses were basically women who were hired to serve as live-in tutors. Then the working condition of these governors varied depending upon the particular family for which the governors might work. So Charlotte Bronte herself was a governess, like Jane Eyre. Then the first thing to be noticed is that it is a Bildungsroman, a novel which is about a personal suffering, and but also having the courage, determination, and wit to overcome all those hindrances or the barriers. The main message of Jane Eyre is that love versus autonomy. So Jane Eyre is very much the story of a quest to be loved. Jane searches not just for a romantic love but also for a sense of being valued or a sense of belongingness. We can call Jane Eyre an autobiography. It is not totally or completely an autobiography, but there are a few elements of Jane Eyre that echo Charlotte Bronte's own life. Like as I already mentioned, Jane Eyre is a governess. Charlotte Bronte herself was a governess. Then a few elements like there is this one friend of Jane Eyre dies out of tuberculosis, like two of Charlotte's sister Mary and Elizabeth. They died of the same disease. Many such similarities can be found in Jane Eyre. Then the setting is at north of England, sometime in the first half of the 19th century. Now I'll be giving a very brief summary of the novel Jane Eyre. You have to read extra to go much deeper into the story, but I'll give you a very basic idea about this novel. So Jane Eyre is a young orphan. She has been raised by Mrs. Reed, her cruel, wealthy aunt. So one day she gets into a fight with John Reed, her cousin, for reading a book from his father's shelf. So, as Jane's aunt imprisons, just as a punishment for fighting with her bullying cousin John Reed, Jane's aunt imprisons Jane in the Red Room. So, this Red Room is supposedly, a haunted room in the family home. It is in this room Jane's uncle Reed died. So while locked in, Jane, believing that she sees her uncle's ghost, she screams and faints. As she wakes to, find herself in the care of a servant, Bessie, and the kindly apothecary, Mr. Lloyd. And it is Mr. Lloyd who suggests to Mrs. Reed that Jane has to be sent away to a school. And Mrs. Reed sends Jane to Lowood School, where the headmaster, Mr. Brocklehurst, he's also very abusive or cruel towards Jane. So just like before, conditions are very poor at the school as well. And there she finds a friend named Helen Burns, and she loses her because of this tuberculosis. And later, after a few series of drama, she becomes a teacher at Lowood. Then, after working there for 2 years, she applies for a governor's position at Thornfield Hall and gets the post. Okay, then she becomes a governess for Adele. Adele is a ward of Mr. Rochester. And then slowly she falls in love with her employer, Mr. Rochester. Then one day a fire breaks out at Thornfield Hall, which nearly killing Rochester as he sleeps. Jane saves him by putting out the fire and waking him up. Then Rochester claims that Grace Poole, he's actually trying to hide something from Jane here. So he claims that it was his servant, Grace Poole. She actually started the fire. But Jane doesn't think that it was Grace Poole. Later, one day, Rochester actually proposes to her, confesses his love, and decides to marry her. And she's very much shocked to hear this, because she thought he's in love with Blanche Ingram. Blanche Ingram is another society kind of lady. So Jane thought that Rochester is actually in love with Blanche Ingram, but once he confesses that he is actually in love with Jane, she is very much shocked. She is very much happy, and they decides to get married. But again, another tragedy was waiting for Jane. On the day of their wedding, a man turns up at the church to declare that Rochester cannot marry because he is already married to someone else. Then Rochester agrees, or he reveals that yes, he is actually married to a woman named Bertha, but Bertha is actually a mad woman. He has actually locked her, upstairs. So she was the one who actually started the fire that day. Of course, Jane is very much disturbed to know this, and she says that she cannot marry Rochester as he is still married to someone else. So one night she runs away from there. She becomes homeless, penniless, and falls sick. Then the Rivers family take her in and nurse her back to health. Jane quickly becomes friends with Mary, Diana, and St. John Rivers. So they are siblings. And St. John is a clergyman and he finds a job for Jane as teaching at a charity school in Morton. And St. John Rivers surprises her one day by declaring that her uncle, John Eyre, has actually died and left her a large fortune of £20,000. When Jane asks how he received this news, he again shocks her further by declaring that her uncle was also his uncle. Yes, Jane and the Riverses are actually cousins. Jane immediately decides to share her inheritance of £20,000 equally with her three newfound relatives. Then there's this drama between St. John and Jane Eyre. So actually, St. John Rivers asked her to join him in his missionary work abroad and he be his wife. She nearly accepts this, but she hears Rochester calling her in a dream. She decides she cannot marry someone she doesn't love. Then she returns to Thornfield. When she arrives, she discovers it has actually burned down, and Rochester is now living at Ferndean, which is his usual retreat, and he is now blind. Then Jane rushes to him and they get married. And as the novel concludes, Jane and Rochester are married with kids. Also, Rochester regains his sight in one eye. So that is how the story goes. Now let's take a look at the major themes of Jane Eyre. The very first theme that can be seen is that love, family, and independence. So as I already mentioned, it is Jane Eyre is very much in a quest to be loved or to feel that a sense of being valued or belongingness. So it is about love, family, and independence. Then other theme is the social class or the social rules. So the life in 19th century Britain was governed by social class, and people actually typically stayed in the class into which they were born. Both as an orphan at Gateshead and as a governess at Thornfield, Jane holds a position that is between these classes and interacts with people of every level, from the working class servants to the aristocrats. So that is another major theme. Then gender roles in 19th century England. Gender roles strongly influence people's behavior and identities, and women endured these attitudes about a woman's place, intelligence, and voice. Jane has an uphill battle to become independent and recognized for her personal qualities. So she faces with a series of men who do not respect women as their equals, like starting from her cousin, that is John Reed, to Mr. Brocklehurst, then again Mr. Rochester and St. John. They all attempt to command and master women. Then another major theme is religion. Religion and spirituality are key factors in how characters develop in this particular novel. So Jane matures partly because she learns to follow Christian lessons and resist her temptations. She is trying to suppress her temptations. Then Helen Burns, her very best friend, she meet at Lowood School. She introduces James to the New Testament, which becomes a moral guidepost for Jane throughout her life. So religion is an important theme in Jane Eyre. Then another theme is feeling versus judgment. as Jane Eyre can be described as Jane's quest to balance her contradictory natural instinct toward independence and submission. It can also be described as her quest to find a balance between these, between passionate feeling on the one hand and judgment or repression of those feelings on the other hand. Then the elements, the elements of spiritual and the supernatural. Bronte uses many themes of Gothic novels to add a more drama to this particular novel, a suspense to Jane Eyre. She uses these themes of Gothic or elements of Gothic novels. But the novel isn't just a ghost story, because Bronte also reveals the reasons behind supernatural events, like the fire. She later reveals that it was Bertha actually behind this. Then Mr. Reed's ghost in the red room, which it is actually a figment of Jane's stressed out mind. Okay, so such things are adds a effect of supernatural or gothic nature to this particular novel. And that's Jane Eyre for you. It's a very brief summary or analysis of Jane Eyre. Please do read extra, and thank you so much for listening.